right, walk-up music. That was they didn't warn me we were getting that when we were talking about panel prep. It's great to see you all here. It's great to be back at the Homeland Security and Defense Forum. I don't know which number this is for me, but it is the first time when I get to ask the question, so I'm very excited about that. We have two of the best folks that you could imagine to talk cyber policy in the Hill with us. And it's an exciting time for that because there are some deadlines coming up that I'm sure you are all tracking in terms of authorities that are expiring. So we're going to just dive right into questions. The one thing I'll say is we have time on the back end for questions from the audience as well. So I'll remind you of that later. But start thinking of them now. And I see some friends from the press, so I'm sure we'll definitely have those at least. Maggie, I'm looking at you. All right. So Alexandra, you know, we sort of talked about this at the outset. We have a new chairman, someone who is very, very familiar, I think, to many folks in this audience. He's got a history in cybersecurity. But can you talk to us a little bit about, with the new chairman of the House Homeland Security Committee, what the priorities are going to be for you all?
Yeah, first of all, it's great to be here with you all, seeing many familiar faces. Also many familiar faces to Chairman Garbarino, a big friend of the cybersecurity community since he's led the subcommittee for the past two Congresses and has been on the subcommittee since the 117th in a leadership role. As you might imagine, many of the same priorities when he ran for chairman of the full committee. He ran on his strong record for cybersecurity. He knows the issues, he cares about them deeply. And as you alluded to, Nick, has been very focused on some key reauthorizations for the community. We've had a pretty regular cadence of hearings that have covered a number of topics. So I think that's something that you can continue to expect as he shifts into this new role. Of course, he has been in the role for, I think, less than 48 hours now. So I think he's still settling in and shaping up what his full agenda is going to be. But I think you can definitely expect that cybersecurity will be a big part of it. I do want to touch on the reauthorizations because I know that this is something that he mentioned as he was going into his candidacy for full committee chairman, and is something that he's been really focused on from the subcommittee level for this whole Congress. Very committed to getting CISA 2015 reauthorized and the state and local cybersecurity grant program. I'm happy to go into the details of how we're thinking about both of those pieces of legislation if that's helpful. But from also a topical perspective, I think other areas that you can see, expect to see continued interest in cyber workforce. As you might remember, that was a big priority of Chairman Green, who just resigned, but has also been very near and dear to the heart of Chairman Garbarino. So I think recognizing that people are at the core of solving a lot of the issues that we see in cybersecurity, we need the right people with the right skills in the right places to stay ahead of these threats. So I think that that's something you can expect to be a theme on the committee as well. And we're very focused in working with the administration and taking a look at CISA as it continues to shift back to its core mission.
Great. Yeah. Knowing the general sophistication of this audience, I think it would be great to hear a little bit more details-wise about where we are with CISA 2015. You know, I was working on the Hill when we spent 4-ish years trying to get it across the finish line between 2011 and 2015. And with 69 days left to go, I think, you know, any sort of, I don't know if folks here have seen, but it's there's a clean tenure reauthorization in the Intelligence Authorization Act that came out of the Senate Select Committee on Intelligence last week. But just any more details there, I think, would be really helpful for folks.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I should say first and foremost, we are committed to making sure that this authority does not lapse. We recognize the criticality that it is, how it underpins everything that we do in cybersecurity, all of the information sharing, whether it's private sector to private sector or private sector to government. And so we recognize that. Now, that said, I think Chairman Garbarino is interested in looking at some changes. It has been 10 years, and so that is a natural time where we're supposed to look in. and reassess and reevaluate to see what has changed and if there is language that needs to be updated. Now, I think we've heard resoundingly from industry that the law has worked. We've also heard that there are tweaks that would be helpful if we were able to clarify them. So that's something that we are exploring now, not at the expense of the law lapsing. So I just want to be very clear on that. But we have been wanting to, and I leave this as open, an open invitation for those who might have changes that they might want to see. Please feel free to reach out to us. That's something that we're looking at actively, and we are looking at all of the vehicles that might exist for us to make sure that CISA 2015 does not lapse.
Great, thanks. Moira, I want to bring you in on this. I know that Ranking Member Thompson was a huge part of getting CISA 2015 done in the first place. So any reflections there from how he's thinking about this 10 years in? And then I got a couple other questions on sort of the legislative front, but if you want anything you want to throw in there.
Yeah, I mean, I'll be brief. From the start, Ranking Member Thompson has said that he thinks the cleanest and most likely path forward is a clean extension. I think he's got concerns that if you open up the bill to edits, then everybody will have edits and everyone will have something that they want. I think he's concerned about inviting that process at this stage. That said, we have a new chairman who has said that he wants to continue, that he wants to consider edits. And so, of course, like, he has to carry the vehicle. At the end of the day, we're in the minority. We can't be the ones carrying the reauth. And so if he wants to consider edits, of course, we'll consider what he would like to have considered. But I think Mr. Thompson continues to believe pretty strongly that a clean extension is something that we must pass, and the CISA mark is sort of a bird in the hand.
Yeah, so that's, I think the resounding thing I'm hearing is it's working and we need to ensure it's extended, and then potentially whether or not there's changes down the road, it's like, at the very least, hopefully we can not take a step back, which is, I think, a decade in, certainly how I view it as the problems that I hear about from CISO communities. I was talking to a bunch of CISOs this morning, are not the same as what I was hearing in 2014, where the first thing anyone came in was like, before I could even talk to you, I had to go and get 7 sign-offs from 7 different lawyers in my GC shop. That was to talk to you, a policymaker. Operationally, it's 15 lawyers. And that is less of a problem today. And I think it speaks to Congress's work on this issue. One other thing more that's certainly interesting to those of us in civil society, and I imagine several folks here, that the ranking member and actually Ranking Member Lofgren from the Science Committee put forward in June was a letter to GAO about the CVE program, the Common Vulnerabilities Enumeration Program at MITRE, looking at, hey, there were some funding questions about that in April. It's caused quite a stir, I think, in the cybersecurity policy community and in operators, something that we've spent a lot of time in civil society looking at. Can you talk to us a little bit about what that means from your perspective and any other things that are sort of on Mr. Thompson, Mr. Swalwell's agendas?
Sure, and it's a kitchen table issue that I'm sure everyone talks about with their friends and family. One of the things, I will start broadly and then I'll get narrow. As happens with any transition from administration to another, there's a little bit of upheaval. People are changing what they're prioritizing. They've got to, get organized in how contracts get renewed, how programs get extended. They take a fresh look at programs. All of that is fair. I think one of the concerns that both Mr. Thompson and Ranking Member Swalwell have is that there has been a little bit of instability brought about by some of the changes that have happened since the transition, whether it's CISA staffing, CISA budget, CISA contracts, et cetera. There has been a lot of instability. I think what one of their goals is together is to bring some stability back to how the federal government approaches cybersecurity in terms of who are you dealing with at different agencies, not just CISA, but at your SRMAs. What programs can you rely on? How are you sharing information, et cetera, which is once again why we're advocating for a clean CISA extension. Once it's a stabilizing force. When it comes to CVE, I think everyone was pretty jolted by the fire drill that happened earlier this year. And the NVD, we also asked GAO to look at the NVD program, which had funding issues last year that resulted in a huge backlog. what our goal is to stabilize these programs. We recognize the benefit of these programs. We want to make sure that there continues to be a standardized CVE database. It makes it easier for researchers, network defenders, everyone to act on the information, and it's coming from a trusted source. But how can we make sure that this isn't a program that could die on a whim of a contract not being extended? So we have asked GAO to take a look at both programs to do an assessment of what's working, what's not working. That is running at a GAO pace, which I love. GAO, that is not a knock. It's because they are so thorough, and we don't want them to be too fast. We don't want them to short circuit anything. So we are working with GAO. At the same time, we are in the process of working with our science committee colleagues, Alan McQuinn, lovely person if you would like to engage with him more on NVD, to develop legislation to stabilize both of the programs. Our goals are to ensure that the programs are stable, that there is appropriate engagement, that there is transparency, and that it continues to be what network defenders need it to be, and that we don't see a segmenting of different CVE programs across, continents or even within the United States. So that is our goal. We are in the process of doing it. If anyone would like to discuss it, please come on in. We are happy to discuss, and we're open to ideas. But I think what we want to direct both CISA and NIST to do is to develop a plan to stabilize the program and do so in a way that takes into consideration the input of stakeholders and the end users of those products.
Yeah, so thanks for that. And I really appreciate the congressional leadership here, because I certainly say when I was at the White House, when I was on the Hill, CVE was what I would call a 2-month away problem. And that is where it remained from 2015, the first time that it kind of bubbled up as, oh, this program that we rely on so much to understand, to just speak the same language about the vulnerabilities we see, seems to have some challenges all the way up until fire drills in 2024 last year about the National Vulnerability Database and the funding snafu earlier in April. So really appreciate Congress stepping in to here. One of the things you mentioned too, Moira, was challenges with transitions. There are always challenges with transitions. One thing that I'll say personally, right, I wrote a blog piece when the new administration's executive order on cyber came out at the beginning of June that said essentially, it's great to see continuity. I worked on the 2023 National Cybersecurity Strategy. It was very important to me that in that we say quite explicitly, this is built on the 2018 National Cyber Strategy, the Trump administration's one, because there has been continuity. This has been a bipartisan area for a long time. And if you look at the June EO from the administration, there is a lot of continuity that makes sense because what we were doing in the Biden administration was building on the Trump administration. That said, there have been some challenges, I think, with the administration and some of their administration, their actually execution of cyber programs. Would love to hear we'll start with you, Moira, of what that looks like from a congressional oversight perspective right now. What things are kind of on your mind when you look at the administration?
I'd say a lot is on my mind, and I think it's on the mind of our members. So I will start broadly. I think, our committee looks predominantly at CISA, but we also care about CIO and CISO shops and SRMA shops across the federal government. And I think at a high level, our first concern was the fork effort, the deferred resignation that I think we still have not gotten from CISA actual data on the number of people that took one of those options, but press reports indicate about 1,000, which is about a third of their workforce. So we know that they've lost a third. We haven't gotten data yet on what programs are impacted most. Where did they lose the most people? So even if we wanted to, I appreciate that a new administration, it's their prerogative to decide to prioritize or deprioritize different programs. That's how elections work. We don't even know what programs they could or could not boost or what programs are winding down because we don't know where the staff is. So I think that's one of our biggest concerns is we don't even know what cards we're playing with at this point because we don't have good data about what staff they have. We don't have good data about the staff at SRMAs, and we don't have good data about the staffing at CIO shops, which has consequences for federal network security. So just basic information about who's working in the government is like our first piece of the first thing that we're really trying to get to the bottom of, particularly when in a bipartisan way, we have focused so much on hiring cyber talent into the government, and to see it eroded is discouraging. I would also then, so that's one level. Then there's the level of how does the private sector engage with the government? And we saw the erosion of different advisory committees and coordination groups. So where is CPAC? We've been told it's going to be reconstituted. It has not been reconstituted yet. How is industry going to have the opportunity to influence government and policy and share information with each other? Towards that end, that is something I think we are starting to look at, maybe sending some stronger direction to the administration about reconstituting. They have the authority to do it, to establish advisory committees in the Homeland Security Act, but maybe they need to be directed to reconstitute something that looks like CPAC. I think we can appreciate trying to streamline advisory committees, but eliminating something that everyone said was really valuable and then not having a way to replace it is not wise. I think the same can be said for CSAC at CISA. I think I'm hopeful that once Sean Plakey is confirmed, he will renominate people to CSAC, but that remains to be seen. And then, of course, the Cyber Safety Review Board has also been disbanded. Their work on Salt Typhoon halted. No indication that anyone in government is really investigating it the same way that CSRB was supposed to. So that's another thing that we are taking a look at legislatively, and seeing if there's other ways that we can sort of spur some momentum there. Those are our initial high level. They're also time-consuming oversight initiatives because there's just so much change happening. But both of people I work for, Mr. Swalwell and Mr. Thompson, do want to bring stability to these, what I'd argue are basically foundational authorities and programs across the government. And I would also just point out, if you don't have people in CIO shops and CISO shops, CISA can't engage with them. The value of CISA's federal network security programs is diminished. And if you don't have people in SRMAs, the sector-specific guidance that you are supposed to get no longer exists. And that's incredibly problematic as well, because we were really trying to build those up. And why we would let them be diminished is something I do not understand.
Yeah, I think the CPAC point is just really well taken. One of the things that's impressed me looking across any sort of cyber hearing that you've seen on the Hill in the last 4 months, there was one on HIPAA in Senate Help last week, where this was the first thing that everyone said was, we want to have a forum where we can engage with the government on policy matters and ways to manage the risk. And that seems like it would be useful. And I think, looking to get those convenings reconstituted as quickly as possible is, again, something that I've just been impressed by how much I've seen in any sort of venue on the Hill, people raising that. One of the things, Alexandra, that Moira mentioned is appreciating the need to streamline. And that, I think, is language that I've also heard from both Chairman Green and Garbarino of saying there maybe needs to be some refocusing. And in general, there's some alignment with what the administration wants to do on some of CISA's mission. At the same time, I think I've heard from both of the chairmen that you don't want to cut into muscle, right? Like, you want to ensure that there are core capabilities there. As you look at, how the administration in its first 7 months is approaching these problems, what's kind of on your mind from an oversight perspective, and how you walk the line of saying, yes, we need to streamline, but we also need to maintain core capabilities? Yeah.
I think it's an important question, and one thing I do want to say is Chairman Garbarino has always been a big advocate for CISA. I think he wants to see CISA be successful and to work well, and so I think this oversight function is very important. We want to make sure that they are set up for success. It's something from the committee perspective that we've realized for a while, that CISA grew pretty quickly in authorities and resources. And so it's been on our minds even prior to this administration of something we needed to look at to make sure that they were really being effective. So when you call CISA, they're able to respond. They have the right resources. They have the tools. They have the people. So I think that this assessment was due for us to take a look. I think we're very hopeful that Sean Plakey can get confirmed. He has his hearing tomorrow, and that will help provide some direction for the way forward for CISA. From a committee perspective, I think just a couple areas that we have been looking at, actually predominantly is looking at CISA's role, dual role as a sector risk management agency for 8 of the 16 critical infrastructure sectors, and as the national coordinator for sector risk management agencies. I think from our perspective, that is a really key role that they play, one that can't be filled by any other government agency. And so it's somewhere where we want to make sure that they are able to fully perform their duties in each of those sectors. One area that we have at least started with is on the communication sector in light of Salt Typhoon, making sure that they are fully performing that role. We know that sector-specific plans have not been updated since 2015. So I think those are some areas we want to make sure they're set up for success. And then in line with even looking at CISA 2015 reauthorization, this is a really important part in feeding into CISA's role as national coordinator of sector risk management agencies. We want them to be able to proactively share information, to be tracking trends, to provide that needed analysis to critical infrastructure owners and operators so that they can protect their networks. Also, we know that critical infrastructure owners and operators, they are, some sectors are just more mature than others. They're very vulnerable. We want to make sure that they are getting the support that they need, especially small to medium-sized businesses, those that are located in rural areas, and CISA can play a really important role with the services and the technical assistance that they provide. So I think those are some areas, coming back to the core missions of cybersecurity, and I shouldn't forget their role for protecting federal civilian executive branch networks. We want them to protect the .gov. We want to make sure that some of those key services that they provide to protect our federal civilian networks are strong. So I think it's time to take a look and make sure that those programs are heading in the right direction, and that critical infrastructure protection remains a strong mission for CISA.
Yeah, and I mean, I will say, since you guys should not be patting yourselves on the backs, I'll do it. This is a core function that the Committee on Homeland Security is uniquely able to perform in the Hill. Jurisdiction in cyber is a mess. It's a complete mess. It's something that, I penned a letter with my boss every year to the Rules Committee saying, please fix this problem. It's been a priority of several chairmen going back, and for Ranking Member Thompson, of trying to consolidate this. But the holistic view that you all talk about in terms of how you look at across sectors is vital, and this is the only place on the Hill where this is really happening. So, I think people should realize that it is really, really hard when you look at all of the different sector risk management agencies, the different committees that they report up to, and we're lucky to have folks like you and Moira who are able to help look at this problem holistically. Not that I have scars from these fights at all. So Moira, last couple questions here, and then we're going to get some from the audience. But one thing that I think is on lots of people who are in this space's mind right now is SharePoint, right? Another, I'm getting flashbacks to 2021, Exchange server, people exploiting at scale, and then potentially saying, even if you've patched, you still got to look, you still got to change basically out as much of your cryptographic keys as possible because people are just looking to exploit and put backdoors in. What's that looking like from a response standpoint right now from where you all sit and, again, conducting your oversight role in Congress?
Yeah, it's giving me flashbacks as well, and not in a good way. So I'll make a couple points on this. So from a CISA response perspective, we did get notices from CISA proactively that they were working with Microsoft in response to this incident. What is different about their response right now from 5 years or 4 years ago is in the past, when there was a major cyber incident like SharePoint, CISA would have convened a congressional call. They would have convened calls with stakeholders. They would have pushed out information in a really, I think, proactive way. I'm sure that CISA did not have fun on the calls with congressional staff. That wasn't our goal, but they haven't happened, and I have asked for them. And I'm concerned that those kinds of calls don't seem to be happening. I don't know why they're not happening. I don't know if it's a staffing issue. I don't know if it's a transition issue. I'm not sure why it's not happening. But in the past, there would have been convened a call that would have included our committee and several other national security committees and they would have walked us through what the incident was, especially when there wasn't a patch initially, but they would have walked us through what the incident was, how the exploit occurs, the kinds of victims, not without being specific, but they would have given us an idea of the kinds of victims that they were seeing, how they were supporting Microsoft, and then how they were supporting the victim victim entities, and then how they were pushing information out to other potential victims on how to identify the activity on their networks. And I think they're still doing some of that. They're just not doing the active calls that they used to do, at least on the congressional side, that really were helpful for our oversight purposes. So I'm hopeful that those will begin again. We are also engaging with Microsoft to try and get more information about what the nature of the incident, the different patches that have gone out over the past month, and want to understand how they're responding. And that will be part of, I think, our bipartisan ongoing oversight of Microsoft as a major supplier, not like picking out a company, but just as a major supplier to the federal government and to critical infrastructure, understanding what they're doing to make sure their technology is secure. And they have been responsive to us. In terms of providing information, I think we're still trying to set up a briefing that we all requested, but they're being responsive. I think more broadly, I think what was interesting about this is the different types of people that are taking advantage of this exploit and the different levels of sophistication of the attacks that we're seeing. So you're seeing some of the attacks that are easier to identify and some of the attacks that seem to be much more complicated to catch on to. And I think that is something that we're going to have to kind of become our new normal of. These things might not always be easy to track, and you might have some sophisticated actors that are that might be doing things that are more interesting and require a different level of monitoring.
Yeah, indeed, I remember those calls well, and I'm not sure that some of my DHS colleagues or former DHS colleagues sitting in the front row might not have enjoyed the questions, but I do think they are very important for making sure that Congress is informed, and there has been lots of oversight that has driven changes over time to responses. And Alexandra, one of the things that I think we've seen from the committee for some time is a focus on advanced threats from the PRC. It's been an area of emphasis at the first full committee hearing of the year. I was at a great hearing in like January 17th or something, super early, but would love to hear sort of your perspectives on both the threat landscape and what you're learning as you conduct oversight of how agencies have responded and how that's informing your policymaking now.
Yeah, absolutely. One thing I do want to clarify on the congressional briefings, I agree, definitely very helpful. I don't think that that's exclusive to this. We haven't gotten them really in a while, so I just want to make that clear, not exclusive to this administration. And looking at the threat landscape itself, yes, we held that hearing just minutes after we constituted as a committee. I think we voted and then everyone came back in and reshuffled for the hearing. Just showing how important it was even to former Chairman Green to make sure that cyber stayed at the top of the agenda. We have been very focused on actors such as Volt Typhoon and Salt Typhoon. Back in earlier this year, we had our oversight subcommittee chairman, Chairman Bergin, Chairman Garbarino, and Chairman Green all send a letter over to DHS requesting a lot of documents from looking at the Volt and Salt Typhoon response. We requested a lot of information, and so that is something that we are still continuing to receive, and we remain in contact with CISA in the interim so that we can make sure that we're performing that oversight work. So that's something that we do hope ultimately, as we dig through our findings, that we can share a bit more. But I think the more that we have had hearings, and especially as we've been focused on these two reauthorizations, I think those two threat actors come up in almost every single hearing. And I think that it underscores the importance of these two authorities to make sure that we can get ahead of those threats. With CISA 2015, it is ensuring that information sharing is happening. And if that were to lapse, it would make it much harder to be able to stay ahead of these threats, especially when they are sitting in our networks, and it might not necessarily be an incident right off the bat. So that's one thing we're keeping in mind. And on the state and local cybersecurity grant program, we know that critical infrastructure is being exploited, and that oftentimes a lot of owners and operators, especially ones that are under-resourced, they just don't have the money to invest in cybersecurity. And so being able to, and we've seen that this program, we had a hearing on it, has really been game-changing for a lot of areas that have finally had the money to be able to invest in basic cybersecurity practices. They all had to submit cybersecurity plans, and they could decide from there what services or to invest in accordingly. So I think that's another way that we hope that if we can continue to bolster resiliency across the country through mechanisms such as state and local cybersecurity grant program, that we can stay ahead of those threats. And on just from the government oversight side, I think that is something that it's something that we're still digging into, and I think is something that we want to understand more, especially on Salt Typhoon, about the steps that were taken, what the coordination looked like, how CISA worked with other agencies. Of course, DHS is within our remit, how they worked with victims, and where we're at specifically, because I think we still have a lot of unanswered questions.
Yeah, I think certainly in the public record, if you look at recent reports on Salt Typhoon, some of them still from the FBI saying, well, we think we have them contained, which is, I don't know, not terribly heartening to me, 9-ish months after this has become public. But I hope we're going to go to Q&A. So if you've got a question, raise your hand and I'll call on you in a second. But I hope that you are getting an appreciation. I'm sure you already have one, but for the many complex issues the Hill has to deal with, from the complete, geopolitical, how do we deal with PRC aggression and our critical infrastructure networks, to something that looks really tactical on the CVE program, but something that is just a foundational pillar to how we do cybersecurity in this country. And we are lucky to have folks like Moira and Alexandra to help. All right, I thought I saw a hand right here. So there are mic runners, and one is coming to you. If you can just identify yourself, that would be great.
Hi, Eva Hampel with Dell Technologies. Nice to see you both. Actually, the last sentence you mentioned about CVE, that is my question, follow up on the CVE. Maybe not dinner table conversation, but some of us are talking about it. Obviously, the funding snafu, as I believe you called it, happened in April. The extension has a limited time frame. As you mentioned, that some of the processes on the Hill legislation, GAO, are slow, but on the business side, there's I wouldn't call it some level of panic, but definitely high-level concern about it. Also, when you look at, say, like the open source community, there are conversations about how to modernize CVE to make it, fit for future and continuing. So I'm just wondering, have you heard from any of these voices yet? Where do you expect those conversations to go, and how do you feel about the 11-month time frame that we're dealing with?
Yeah. So high level, no, we haven't heard from a lot of people, surprisingly. We heard from people during the fire drill. And then people were like, as we do with a lot of fire drills in DC, once the fire's out, we're like, oh, we're good, and for 11 months. So I think people have, and it's also like just not a kitchen table issue, right? So it's like a little bit niche. And there's so much, there's a bit of a flood in the zone, right? There's a lot happening in the cyber world, and CVE is so important, but we're hearing from people on other things. I invite everyone to come talk to us about CVE. We would love it. But I think what we plan to do, and I told Alan I was going to tell everybody, so he'll be fine with this, is we have legislation that, like I said, is supposed to be a forcing mechanism to get CISA and NIST to really chart out a path forward. We're going to circulate that and we'll hope to get everyone's feedback. I think part of, like, in addition to actually generating a path forward, which is like the legislative goal, I think another benefit of this process is it generates the conversation and the buzz that keeps everyone focused on the issue, right? I think, and there's a role to play for a lot of different actors. There's a role to play for our committee. I think, getting permanent leadership at CISA will be helpful, so we don't have like is this will we, won't we on this contract? I think things like that are going to be really, really important. I think I don't want to be glib, but in my experience so far, this administration has been responsive to outside stakeholders, particularly industry. If industry makes noise and says they want this to continue, my assumption is that will be very helpful to making sure it continues and stabilizing it. I don't want to speak for them. I obviously do not speak for them as a Democrat for the House, but but my experience has been like squeaky wheel gets the oil. So keep being a squeaky wheel.
All right, Maggie.
Maggie Miller with Politico. Great to see all of you guys. Hi. I guess as a follow-up to actually what you just said, Moira, I want to ask Alexandra, your thoughts on if you've seen this draft that's being circulated and thoughts on the majority side on this. And then secondly, who might succeed Chairman Garbarino on the Cyber Subcommittee?
So, are you asking about the draft of the legislation?
Yes. Oh, she hasn't. We have not shared that with
yet.
anyone yet. Like, we are still
Yes.
finishing edits. We have gotten, I don't want to get into the feedback we've gotten, but we haven't circulated it broadly. And so she will get a draft as soon as we circulate it. We were not going to keep secrets from Alexandra. So open, we like to be open. She will get a draft. But you were aware we were doing, I mentioned to you we were doing it. So we're not keeping secrets.
And I will say broadly, we've been tracking this issue too, and we want to make sure that it's resolved and stabilized. So we look forward to reading your legislation. I have no guesses for you right now. So we'll see. It's still early in the process. Again, he was just picked on Monday, so it's going through the course of next steps now.
Great. Other questions?
Hi, my name's Jaden Beard. I'm from Inside Cybersecurity. This is a question for Alexandra. You mentioned that Chairman Garbarino wants to make some changes to CISA 15. I was wondering if you could expand on if there's anything specific he wants to be changed.
Yeah, some of that we're still working on. So I do invite anyone from industry who would like to discuss that. We're happy to discuss those changes, but we're not ready to share them just yet.
Great. Any other questions? All right. Well, we're right on time at 4:30. So I hope you'll join me in thanking our panelists from the Hill for the conversation and for the work they do every day. I'll turn it back over to Megan.
Let's give them one more big round of applause.